I didn't expect the Minnesota Vikings to have a good running back room in 2023, but I also didn't expect it to be the worst room on their roster. Let's see what we can do about that next year. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like it? 3, 1, 2, 3. You like it?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are we doing, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to this show every single day. My hashtag everydayers. I appreciate y'all so very much. I love hearing from you. I want to hear from you on something. I'm going to pose a question to you later in the show. So get your Twitter fingers or whatever ready, because I want to hear from you. Because we're going to talk about the running back room today. If you're new here, you can find this show on anything you listen to podcasts on, including the SiriusXM app. You can also search out any team and find like hometown broadcasts of that team. You can go listen to the 49ers broadcast of the 49ers-Lions game if you want something good and biased against the division rivals. You can also find the show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So today on the show, I want to embark on a little something that should tide us over for a couple of weeks while there's still not going to be much to talk about, and just do like a little bit of this of a state of the room thing. And there are some specific questions I want to answer here, because I'm not just going to sit here and complain about the rooms that were bad and talk about how Ivan Pace was good when we get to linebackers, stuff like that. I want to really answer the questions, which is like, strategically, where should we go here? You know, who are the free agents? What is the cap situation of this room? And try to really take stock of what sort of urgency the Vikings should have in addressing that room. Obviously, quarterback is the big one. I'm not going to do it for this one because that's going to be like every other show. It's going to be like, we're going to talk about quarterbacks a lot. So we don't need a dedicated one for that. But in terms of stuff like the running backs, the defensive line, the cornerback room, things like that, we'll go into what I think the Vikings need to think about, right? And that will also sort of be a retrospective on how that room did in the 2023 season. While I'm at it, it's also Twitter Tuesday tomorrow, so get your questions in. You can send them to me on Twitter at LukeBraunNFL or at Locked On Vikings. You can also send me an email at LockedOnVikingsPodcast@gmail.com. You can also send questions to the Google form down in the show notes. I have a specific question for you later about the running backs that email me your answers to, or leave them in a YouTube comment, or send them to me on Twitter or something like that. But don't put it in the Google Doc, because I only ever look at that when it's Twitter Tuesday, and I'll miss your answer. For now, I want to talk about the running backs, because I think the running backs carry a sense of urgency that's going to be a little underrated, because like running backs don't matter and all that. But here's the deal. There's a lot of facets to this conversation I want to have. I want to talk about Alexander Mattison and what do we do with Cam Akers and Ty Chandler and all of that. I want to talk about what the Vikings could do to improve that room. And I also just want to generally discuss the importance of running backs in the context of we don't have any good ones, because the Vikings don't have any good ones. That's where I'm at on the running back room. Alexander Mattison, for the first time in his career, got his chance to be the true blue bona fide starter. And he got benched twice for two different guys. That's rough. That's a rough showing. And while I am a little more apologetic to Alexander Mattison than most, I think I'm more sympathetic than most, because I don't think he has bad vision, which we'll get to that. That it still wasn't a good outing, right? Like, you can't get benched twice and say you secretly had a good year. But the guys he got benched for weren't head and shoulders improvements necessarily. Ty Chandler had plenty of his own issues, and Cam Akers, I thought, was better than Alexander Mattison, not by a gigantic margin, and then he got hurt while he was still sort of building momentum, so who knows how high he would have climbed. But let me first kind of say the take as clearly as possible. Mattison wasn't good, but he wasn't that bad. That's where I'm at. He wasn't good enough to give him the starting job next year. I think that would be incredibly naive, and I'd be actually pretty surprised if the Vikings did that because they've already shown that they aren't particularly loyal to Alexander Mattison. They benched him twice in the season. You don't often see teams bench a player and then go back to him and not give him any competition, right? So I think competition, at least for the running back room, is appropriate. And honestly, I think if they don't do that, that's a pretty strong negligence case, right? Like, you already identified and acted as though this were a problem. To act like it won't be a problem in the next season would basically just be Kwesi declaring, yeah, we don't really care about this position. And I guess if that's the argument you want to make, that's the argument you want to make. But I don't think that that's appropriate. I firmly believe that you should try to get as good of players as possible at every position, right? And the cost benefit of that is where you get into the economics of like positional value and stuff. But without considering the costs and just saying running back benefits are marginal and whatever, you're not really doing that analysis, right? Because once you factor in the cost of a running back, it has gone down so much. I wonder what Saquon Barkley will get on the open market this year. There was, of course, the franchise tagged guys like Tony Pollard and I think Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor until they signed their new deals. But like top of market for running backs would go to Jonathan Taylor, who's making $14 million a year. Josh Jacobs got $12 million a year on a 1-year deal. Those were like the top of market running backs. So if you're looking at like Saquon Barkley, Brad Spielberger, who does the contract projections for PFF, projected an $11 million a year deal for Saquon Barkley. That's top of market. That's like the guy. That's the we're going to splurge at this position guy is 11 mil. Some other guys making around $11 million right now. Bobby Okereke is making $10 million a year. How about Devon Hamilton, a defensive tackle for the Jacksonville Jaguars, or David Onyemata, who's right there with him at around 11.5. How about Yannick Ngakoue for the Bears at the age of 29 on his like 7th team or whatever is making $10.5 million. Zadarius Smith made a little over $11 million for the Browns after he signed his new deal with them after getting traded there. That's the kind of guy that you're going with, and you're going like top of market, like in the defensive line market. That's like top 25 money for like the top guy. That's really cheap. Running backs are really cheap now. And I think that the value of running backs has sufficiently deflated to where we can consider them like as actual value propositions again, and not just blanket dismiss any running back as, yeah, you don't want to pay a running back. You don't have to pay a running back. You can get one without paying him now. That's the way the market has responded, and I think recalibrated itself. It might even keep going down and then have to like recalibrate the other way. It'll be another really weird year. We might not see Saquon Barkley sign anywhere until like June, because he's just going to try to hold out for more money and get something. Or maybe he re-signs with the Giants or whatever. We'll see what happens with them. But either way, I think that running backs have at least enough value where they're worth spending a little time thinking about. And then when it comes to the actual assets you want to spend on them, how high should you draft one? How much money should you spend on one? You can still be very judicious depending on the guy that you're targeting, right? Drafting a running back in the top 5, probably not a thing. Probably not going to have to be a thing if you want the top running back in the class, right? Jonathan Taylor was a 2nd-round pick. He was definitely the best running back in that class. So all in all, I think that the approach of, let's just stick a couple undrafted free agents who suck in there and then like hope it'll be okay, I would call it naive and just a little bit short-sighted. So instead, let's actually talk about these guys. Why do I think the way I think about Alexander Mattison? What about Cam Akers? What about Ty Chandler? And what can they do in the future? So that's what we're getting into next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. It is January, and if you are trying to expand your small business, or if you're hiring for somebody who is expanding their business, hiring is a huge investment, which means it's a huge gamble. It's a risk, and when you take that kind of risk, you got to do a lot of research. But to do research for hiring, you have to look through a completely impossible stack of resumes, and you have to narrow it all down. And it's really easy to make like rush decisions that turn out to be mistakes. Don't do that. Let LinkedIn Jobs help you. LinkedIn can help you with all kinds of tools like a job description aid tool and screening tools and stuff that make it easy to find a quality candidate, because LinkedIn is chock full of quality candidates. Over 1 billion professionals and 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So post your job for free to linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done with this, I would love it if you went to patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL and watched my Jaden Daniels video. If you don't care about all this running back stuff and you're just like, dude, just talk to me about the quarterbacks, guess what? Got a whole big video, I think it's like 45 minutes long, on Jaden Daniels up on patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL, and it's free to watch. All of my quarterback breakdowns are free to watch. They are going to be up until the draft entirely. So I would appreciate your support so you can help me make that possible. But I also want it to be accessible to everybody. So go check it out. Go, if you got the time, go sit down, watch some quarterback stuff. Also, while you work, or if you're the kind of person that watches things on YouTube while you work, or you just want some something to flick on and forget about, how about that 24/7 Locked On Minnesota Sports live stream? Go to Locked On Minnesota Sports on YouTube, find that live stream and click it on. It's got this show, the Wolves version of this show, Twins version, Wild version, and all the Locked On Minnesota Sports offerings as well. So go check all that out. So let me quit beating around the bush and tell you about my Alexander Mattison take. So like I said, not great, but not as bad as everybody says. And I think he got way too much hate this year. I spoke about it a little bit in the middle of the season, but let's back away a little bit here. So the two things that I look for the most in a running back are sound decision-making and burst. Burst is a really broad category for me that can be achieved via athleticism and, just accelerating really fast. And it can also be achieved via making quick decisions and hitting holes before they close. Burst to me is just shorthand for, I want you to hit the hole before it closes and get through it, right? And that requires sound decision-making. So pick the right hole and get through it fast. That is what I care about with running backs. Once you get into the second level, for me, and this is sort of an analytic pill to take, for me, I don't judge you as much on what you do in the second level. I think that's what everybody gets really, really excited about when it comes to like draft running backs, right? Just like running all over like Big Ten defenses. And while it's very cool and fun to watch, them juke and jive and cut in open space, the meat and potatoes of what you do at running back happens between the tackles. So I want to see how you play between the tackles. That's what I care about in a running back. So that's going to be part of it, because Alexander Mattison isn't really meant to do a lot in the second level. He's going to put his shoulder down and bowl somebody over, but he doesn't, juke and jive and run for an 80-yard touchdown like Dalvin Cook did. And we did go through like a decade of like Adrian Peterson all the way through to Dalvin Cook, a decade and a half of Peterson all the way through Cook. So we got to see some pretty fun running back play for a while, and we had a bad year of it. So it's going to be a little extra jarring. So I think that is going to sort of put more distance between me and the general like cognoscenti of Vikings running back plays, where I can kind of recognize, okay, this is bad, but I'm not going too crazy because there are other teams in the NFL that have had bad running back play in the past. We're just one of them now. And also the fact that Alexander Mattison can get through the hole, get 7 yards, and then get tackled, I always look at that and I go, nice, great play. Really happy with that, right? That's what the run game wants to be. 7 yards a pop and you can't stop me, right? A consistent 7 yards a pop in the run game, that's devastating if you can get 7 yards consistently. In the pass game, the standard's a little bit different because you got to work a little harder. And of course, there's more risks and stuff like that. It's a totally different game. So with Mattison, I also think that the complaints about his vision are totally unfounded. And let me just put it in simpler terms. I think a lot of people are wrong, just generally about like the way that those run plays are supposed to read out. And I did an entire thing about how run plays read out in the offseason leading up to the 2023 season on Locked On Vikings, and a whole bunch on my Patreon page, which is all free to watch as well by now. So if you want to know more about what I mean by that, you can go find those. I'll just let those episodes like speak for themselves. But suffice it to say, I struggle to remember maybe more than one play. I think maybe there was one play where Alexander Mattison did something and I couldn't figure out what he was thinking. And that's really the mark of like, what were you doing? What were you thinking, right? I could at least always see what he was going for, and then, the guy made a good play, good job, right? There were times with both Cam Akers and Ty Chandler where I went, there is no way you actually thought you were getting through that gap, where they would just run straight into a covered gap and get tackled. Nothing, no gain. And Mattison would have runs for no gain. I think, and I'm going off the dome here, I don't have any statistics for this. It feels to me like he didn't get as good of run blocking, which is just kind of how the cookie crumbles sometimes. But I think generally, and pretty commonly, Mattison made the right decision. And when you make the right decision, you're basically always going to start over somebody who makes the wrong decision but might be a better athlete. Because if you can run fast to the wrong place, and it's always going to be a negative play. It's just going to be a negative play that happens faster. So that said, the burst thing. There were definitely times where Mattison would try to get through that hole and he just wouldn't quite have the oomph, right? And he would get caught up in the hole by a defensive tackle that was able to react quickly enough. And I don't think he compressed that window enough for me. He didn't make it hard enough for defensive tackles to get off their blocks and get to him because there was too much time. So let me put my Mattison take in more concrete phrasing. I don't necessarily think that benching him for Ty Chandler was the correct move. I think Ty Chandler had a lot of vision issues, and he had the burst. When he got into the second level, cooler stuff would happen, but I think you had to eat negative runs a little bit worse with him. And Mattison, the whole thing of Mattison was that the run would very rarely be negative if there was anything he could do about it. I think there were a couple times he got slammed in the backfield right at the mesh point. That's not ever going to be on the running back, right? But with Chandler, and to a lesser extent with Akers, but I think as he was getting more and more familiar with the playbook, this was getting better, and he was kind of becoming the best of both worlds, which is why I was excited about him. Such a bummer he got hurt when he did. With Chandler, there were a lot of plays that just turned negative, not to mention the pass pro issue, which for me, if Ty Chandler does not get better at pass protection, that was catastrophic enough, especially in those last couple games when he was like the running back, right? He would give up like 3 sacks in a game. I think that happened against the Packers, and I think he still got smoked in both the Lions games when he played. That's bad enough where if that doesn't get better, I don't know if he makes the team. And I that might be a big shell shock to a lot of people that thought he's like the future of this young developing guy. You have to be able to block. If I can't put you in on pass plays, if the Vikings have to roll into another season making CJ Ham their third down running back, they built that room poorly. I think the Vikings need a lot of help in this room. One, maybe even 2 new players to inject in exciting talents. Give me somebody that's got that juice, right? So I don't know anything about the draft running backs. That'll be a conversation for way down the road when we're much closer to it, maybe even in like April itself. But in terms of actual free agents, there are always a lot of guys in interesting situations that I think are worth pursuing. The Vikings do not have the complete package yet. And when I say complete package, I mean a guy that checks 2 boxes. We got a guy that checks the vision box, but not really the burst box. We got a guy that checks the burst box, but not really the vision box. They both had their blemishes in pass pro, although Alexander Mattison was definitely not nearly as bad as Chandler was. And then we've got Cam Akers, who I think could check both boxes, but he's also a pending free agent, and he's also coming off another Achilles injury. So what do we do here? I said in a previous show that I would be fine bringing Cam Akers back, but obviously he's never going to cost any money. He's coming off those Achilles injuries. He's going to get a prove-it deal. I'd be happy to give him that prove-it deal, but I'm pretty agnostic toward it. What else is going on here? What about the Saquon Barkley idea? Like what can we do? What are these situations? Let's look to the future next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed by placing any $5 bet. I am talking any singular $5 bet. If you want to place a quick emotional hedge on the Detroit Lions, you don't want to see the Detroit Lions be a Super Bowl winner before the Vikings do. I certainly don't want to see that. I don't know how I can handle to win a Super Bowl. Emotionally, I don't think I can handle that. So I might put $5 on the Detroit Lions to win the Super Bowl, just to, see if, just to ease the pain a little bit if it happens. And if you do that, by the way, if you sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and go place any $5 bet, whether that bet wins or loses, you get $150 in bonus bets. So show up to FanDuel.com, place any $5 bet. It can be a super like short odds money line bet. It can be some long odds, total crazy thing. Whatever it is, whether it wins or loses, you get $150 back in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get in on the action. That is FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, let's rock and roll with this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. The running back market is deeply saturated with free agents. There are a lot of people who are about to be looking for a job. And so when I look at possible running back free agents, my initial thought is all of these guys are going to be cheap because of supply and demand, right? The supply is just so high. And that's part of the economics that have made running backs cheaper in the first place, right? As I understand the phenomenon, when you are a high school player, the most athletic kid will be a running back for the most part, right? Some of them will put him at quarterback and, some will run like a wing tee and stuff like that, right? And run, running offenses if you're super athletic. But in general, if you have your best athlete at running back, you can run 80% of the time in high school. It is a totally different game in the NFL where running all the time can be a viable strategy. Absolutely. And you just give the ball to the most athletic dude and watch him run around and never get tackled, right? So the most athletic kids, the kids most likely to be NFL caliber athletes, are going to disproportionately be put at running back. And then through college and into the NFL, you get this like big oversaturated crop of running backs. There's just too many, which is part of why, the difference between a good running back and a bad running back has an impact on an offense. I don't think that that's deniable. Even if we aren't very good at measuring that impact, you can see what happens when a running back misreads the play, gets tackled 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage on a well-blocked zone play. Like that was the running back's fault and it had an impact. And especially with the Vikings, watching that happen over and over and over again was pretty frustrating. The Vikings had a bad running game. They could still pass for 400 yards a game. They could overcome it with something else, but they left meat on the bone with that running game, right? So the argument isn't necessarily that having a good running back or a bad running back is a wash, right? It's that getting a good running back is so easy that you don't need to spend resources on it. That's the part of the argument that I'm still like pretty sympathetic to. And I mean, listen to this crop of names: Devin Singletary, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Ezekiel Elliott, Gus Edwards, Cordero Patterson. That'd be a really funny one. Austin Eckler, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry. That's like 8 of the top 10 running backs from the last 5 years are free agents this year. Like, if you want a good running back in free agency, pick your dude. They're everywhere. Or go with a Zach Moss, right? Go with somebody who's a little younger. Travion Williams, J.K. Dobbins is coming around. Salvon Ahmed. Cam Akers isn't the worst idea here. I know he's coming off the Achilles injuries and I don't really have any expectation. I wouldn't make him a load-bearing column or anything like that, but I would love to see him in the room and see what he can do. And hey, go fight for your job in camp. Boston Scott's an interesting one. DeAndre Swift, Brandon Bolden, the names go on, depending on what you want. You want an elder statesman that knows what they're looking at and can be a good kind of give you a floor, even though they don't necessarily have that burst that they used to have anymore. Maybe that's Derrick Henry nowadays. Maybe that's somebody like Jerick McKinnon who's going to be a free agent. Or if you want somebody a little bit more exciting, Antonio Gibson is, there could be your kind of second contract guy, which was a great, Rick Spielman move he loved to do, was to give the guy coming off the rookie contract his first big contract in free agency. Or, you can look at somebody like Saquon Barkley or Tony Pollard, who played on the tag, right? Or who played on like these sort of modified deals. I look at this market and see a lot of potential for success, specifically because how many teams are going to be in the running back market, right? Make up a number. Doesn't 5, 6? How many teams are going to be in the market for like a major running back? It'll probably honestly work out that, however many of these guys you would count as major running backs, it's probably that many, right? But however many teams it is, they will not have to capitulate to a lot of demands in a negotiation. If you are negotiating with Saquon Barkley and he says, I want $15 million a year, you can kind of look him in the eye and say, we're not going to do that because we know that we can get Tony Pollard for 12. In terms of the room itself, I think everybody who's on the roster gets to stay on the roster, right? Which is Dwayne McBride, who probably won't cost anything above like the top 53 contracts, which means rostering him means you're cutting someone more expensive. So it's negligible for sure. Myles Gaskin, probably the same thing. He is still figures to be under contract. I think he just signed a futures deal or something. Ty Chandler, about $1 million. And then Alexander Mattison's the big one. He costs $4.6 million. $4 million of that is tied up because it's all guaranteed. He's also in the last year of a deal. So post June cutting and stuff doesn't make any difference. There's no extra years to like trick the salary cap into considering. It's just kind of is what it is. He costs $4 million. So the whole room right now costs like $5 million and 4 of it's tied up. They basically have no additional commitments that they haven't already made that aren't like already sunk costs. So I think it's super, super justifiable to bring in a prized running back free agent. It won't be that expensive. It will have an effect on the roster. And that room right now is basically nothing. It's a whole bunch of players that I don't think should be bona fide starters, and they're not making bona fide starter money. They don't have a guy. Go get a guy. That's where I'm at right now. So what I want to hear from you, if you disagree with me about Alexander Mattison, send me an email. And what I want you to do is send me the play about his vision that you think shows that he has bad vision. And whether that's if you clip it, then that's great. Or if you find a tweet that has it, then that's great. Or even if you just say it was, that one in the second quarter from the Bengals game or whatever, like that will work too. If you give me like the time that was on the clock or whatever, I can go find it myself. Send it to me. You can send an email, lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or at me on Twitter, or tell me in a YouTube comment what you think. Tell me the evidence that I'm wrong about Alexander Mattison and that his vision was actually bad, and I don't think it was bad. And tell me why I'm wrong. I will break down those plays in some format at some point, and I'll collect them over time. So bring me your Alexander Mattison evidence, and I want to go into it. All right, let's do that. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow for Twitter Tuesday, and as always, Skull.